Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. We've heard from Claudio, we've heard from Mr. Amitabh Kant. Yes, indeed, we've come up with a very ambitious roadmap at COP26. We've heard about the 5 commitments that Prime Minister Modi has made. And of course, now we'll have to put it into law, have some sort of legislation to make sure there is a clear roadmap for companies like Hitachi Energy and for the rest of the Indian industry and multinationals to follow, to know exactly where we are heading, what India's priorities are, and what they need to do in the next 10 to 15 years or so. So without wasting any more time, I'm going to call all our panelists here. We're joined by Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, Chief Executive Officer, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. Thank you very much for joining us. We also have Claudio Facchin, CEO, Hitachi Energy. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Let me also call in Renuka Gera, Director, Industrial Systems and Products at BHEL. Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General, the Energy and Resources Institute. Thank you so much for joining us here on this panel discussion, and let's have a seat and begin this discussion. The focus of our panel discussion today, you've heard from Mr. Amitabh Kant, you've heard from Claudio, of course Niti Aayog playing a very crucial role in preparing India's roadmap, whether be it mobility, whether it is green hydrogen, or how we can attain those 5 commitments and how we can reach there as well. But without wasting any more time, today we're going to discuss how India can accelerate and advance its sustainable energy projects and future as well. Now, let me start with some context setting, and I'd like to begin with Arunabha. We made these 5 commitments. Clearly, sustainable development is very big on India's agenda, and this is something that had impressed the world as well at COP26. But what will be the key to implementing this, key to reaching these goals in future?
Well, Parikshit, and good evening everyone. Thanks to Hitachi Energy for having me in this important discussion. Parikshit, the most important thing in the very near term is going to be finance and investment. And Claudio has heard me say this in Glasgow, and I'm just going to repeat that message simply because the important targets that India set forward for the near term means that there is no time to waste. Right? So during the course of this evening, say it stretches for about an hour and a half, we should have deployed 15 megawatts of renewables, right? Because every working hour we have to deploy 10.5 megawatts of renewables for 6 days a week, 52 weeks a year for the next 9 years. So it's kind of this breathless marathon that we have to be running. Now these technologies already exist, right? We know what a solar panel looks like, we know what a wind turbine looks like. So to deploy these technologies, we just need to say yes, and the tap should open and the money should flow, right? However, as soon as we start reaching, as Mr. Kant was saying, as Claudio has said, as we start reaching a certain penetration of renewables into the electricity system, right now we are at about 10%, with large hydro it's about 20%, little over 20%. But when we start approaching the 30% of electricity generation and then keep moving upwards, then you need more balancing. Now that balancing can come from a much better grid, it can come from storage batteries at the household level, it can come from storage at the grid level, and a combination of solar, wind, hydro sort of balancing each other out. That will require investment in developing and deploying new generation technologies as well.
Right.
And finally, as we approach the 2047 marker, you know, when we're a 100-year-old independent nation, when really the green story is the only story that we are playing with, then the issue around, you know, large penetration of green hydrogen, driving a big part of our energy, of our industrial energy, but also serving as a potential storage for the electrical energy part. So I see this as kind of, you know, what do you do till 2030, what do you do from 2030 to 2047, and what do you do beyond?
Right, and CEW has also come out with a report saying that we would need at least $10 trillion in climate financing if we have to reach this goal as well. Of course, India at COP26 has pitched for at least $1.3 trillion in climate financing every year. Let me also get in Claudio now. Claudio, when we look at opportunities in this sector, tell us about the key opportunities and the challenges that you foresee both globally and in India.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having this great panel and contribution, and it would be important to get the perspective from everyone. But starting from the technology side, I think it's important for all of us to align on the fact that there is a lot of technology available today, and that we need to leverage all that technology, proven. We need to continue investing in new technology. Innovation is, of course, essential, but there is a lot of technology today that can be leveraged to do a lot of what needs to be done. As long as that technology contributes to decarbonization, it should be leveraged. Most of those technologies, by the way, today are complementary. And I can share one specific example which is really related to the grid aspect, but we heard many times in the past, the next 10 years we have to massively deploy storage. And we disconnect the grids, we create microgrids, and we deal with electrification across the globe. What we're saying is we need to do that, but we cannot do only that. We need to, at the same time, to invest in backbones, as we see India is actually been doing for the last couple of decades. We need to invest in technologies that help improving reliability, resilience, power quality, demand response, and of course deploy digitalization across the value chain. So it's not which one, as long as that technology contributes to take carbon out of the equation, needs to be deployed. And once again, then we need, of course, the right incentives. We need the right schemes so that the financial dimension comes in and then provides the necessary resources to deploy all of that.
Right. Thanks for the important context, Claudio, and I'd also like to get in Dr. Vibha Dhawan. The Energy Resources Institute also came out with a COP26 Charter. Now, there are several pillars to how India can reach this 2070 goal as well. What are some of the challenges that you foresee, considering where we are right now in terms of development?
Well, as rightly said by right now that we do have technologies, but you know, technology is not something that you bring it and plug it. It needs some sort of, I should say, adaptation to the country, to the region, and so on. Of course, one of the important things remains is that of financing. Now, Prime Minister's commitment definitely has shown to the industry also that what they are doing today as an option will become mandatory tomorrow, and therefore they have to move in that direction. Then comes the finances. We also have to see that as a country, it is not big companies alone, it is small and medium enterprises also that also need to decarbonize themselves. So there I see, and we all are saying innovation, we are saying research, and we are also saying that we should have capacity to absorb the new technology. Because what happens is that most of us, if we haven't studied hydrogen, we have no experience with hydrogen, how are we going to adapt to that? And there will be problems, like in every technology when you adopt that, there will be glitches, there will be failures. And unless and until you have manpower, trained manpower to do that, it's not going to work. And then we'll say the technology never worked. I agree, we don't have to reinvent the broken wheel, but once we have that wheel in hand, then we, as a country, it is not one company taking the technology and working on it. As a country, we have to bring the technology to the country. Finances are required, definitely. One is not saying free finances, but at least some sort of time that it should pay back. The technology, the adopter of the technology, they do not have to invest, they have to pay by using that source of energy.
Right.
So, that finance remains important. Then you bring the technology, you work on it, you make it suitable for Indian subcontinent, or I will say India perhaps will show way to all the Asian countries, have capacity. So, you have to do some research and create capacity to absorb that. So, that is
right. All right, thank you for sharing that vision with us. Of course, those are very important guidelines which I am sure the Indian government would be watching very closely. And just for some more context, India has committed to having 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy by 2030. It's a steep target, but yeah, we are preparing a roadmap, and all the stakeholders that we have on our stage right now are working towards that as well. India's Central Electricity Authority has done a projection for the country's energy mix for 2030, and that shows it that India will have to have solar energy installed capacity of 280 gigawatts and wind energy installed capacity of 140 gigawatts. Now, I'd like to get in Mr. Renuka Gera at this stage. What are the opportunities that you see for PSUs like BHEL when it comes to India's energy transformation? They'll have a critical role to play. How do you see the goals that have emerged out of COP26? Yes, India took a very tough stand on certain issues such as the language in coal. We were one of the countries which said that you cannot force developing countries to phase out coal. You need to change the language, and you can't force us to have strong climate crisis mitigation targets but not have the finance to back it as well. So, how do you see the outcomes from COP26, and what will PSUs like BHEL have to do in energy transformation?
Yeah, thanks Parikshit. Actually, as you know, we are a power manufacturing company. We have been supplying, in majority of the thermal power plants in India have been done by BHEL. Now, in this context also, when we talk about decarbonization and all, our role becomes important. We are coming out with many pollution abatement equipments, like FGD you would have heard of, flue gas desulfurization, SOx, NOx, etc. We are working on it. Even water body contamination, taking care of lakes, purification, etc. We are working on those. Yesterday itself, we set up a air pollution control tower. You must have heard the news at Noida, the first one in UP. So, there are parallel activities which we are taking care of, but to say yes that thermal is going to be phased out, I have differing opinion on this. It has to go hand in hand along with the renewable energy, for the simple reason, as Claudio mentioned, the grid, till the time we are able to fix the grid issues, and India being a very large country, we are having a population of 1.4 billion. So, not only we have to look at energy security, we also have to look at the cost competitive and cost of energy. So, that becomes very important. So, we have to see how with the existing equipment and technology that we have, what changes we can bring out, what could be the carbon capture methodologies which we adopt, so that we remain close to net zero. Net zero is very aspirational, we are talking about 2070, but yes, we have to adopt to the new technologies, and that is where probably Hitachi Energy and other technologies might be giving us hand in that.
Right. So, that's an interesting point that you make. We have our own development needs. These are ambitious goals. They need a lot of work. We need to be technologically agnostic. There's not one technology like Claudio says which will work. We have to see what works for us, what is cheap, what can be done on scale. Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, the Environment Minister, made a critical point at COP26. He said that the developed world has generated huge amounts of wealth, gained great prosperity because of coal-based industries and fossil fuel subsidies as well. You cannot ask the developing world to phase it out.
Not only that, Parikshit, even today people are having farcical attitudes, I would say. We know China, they have announced I think more than 40
2060 outcomes
in the first 6 months.
Right.
We have seen even in UK where this conference took place, they had to resort to, as with the winter approaching, to starting their old thermal plants.
Right.
Germany has set up a thermal power plant in, I think, last year itself. So we have to balance. As I said, there is no one common solution.
Right. As somebody who has been monitoring this sector, the energy sector, very closely for many years now, ma'am, when you look at India's energy transformation, what are the pillars that it will be based on, Ms. Gera?
See, we have to balance, as I said, whatever greenhouse emissions are very important. We simply cannot ignore, not for our own health, for the health of the next generations to come. We have to balance whatever CO2 we are introducing, we have to find a way of capturing that and seeing that we are moving ultimately towards net zero. This should be the basic target. But then the cost of doing this is very important. I think two panelists have already mentioned the large funding requirements for this.
Right.
And the technology obviously. Whatever latest is available, we should be able to adapt that to our Indian conditions and see to it that we are finally moving towards decarbonization.
Right. Claudio, if I may ask you about funding. It is often said that when it comes to climate financing, a lot of heavy lifting will also have to be done by industries. Yes, you also need those subsidies, as we've seen in the case of China, especially with regard to electric vehicles as well. So how does one strike that balance? And when a company is looking to invest, and these are all new technologies, these are emerging technologies, and these are emerging markets when it comes to green hydrogen, be it mobility, be it hydrogen. So how do you choose whether you want to invest in a country in these technologies for the long term, and where do you want government support, and where are the places where you can pitch in with your own finances?
Yeah, so of course, from us, and that's our somehow heritage over 100 years, we've been driving innovation based on customer needs, based on market needs. And if you look at the journey that the whole electrification went through, I think it's clear to everyone that other than the first step of introducing electricity as an energy source, this is the second largest transformation of that sector. So from our side, we need customers that can challenge us. We need customers that are ready also to hear our perspective on certain areas, precisely because we can leverage our experience across markets, across sectors. We need, of course, an environment that gives us the stability, the certainty of the long term, so that we can then do our proper return on investment.
Right.
And avoid making decisions on the short term that would make that technology for the short term not competitive, and it would be then potentially a mistake, because we've seen it, some of those technologies, wind, solar, the tremendous advancements in terms of cost out in the last decade or so. If I may specifically use India as an example, and I think we mentioned it before, what is also important for us is when we look at a market, and India has that, is a combination of all these factors. And you might not have all of them at the perfect place where you would like to, but there is a combination that makes that market, and therefore that investment, more attractive. And I think definitely from innovation standpoint, the complexity of the market itself from a grid standpoint, the already existing breadth of technology that has been used in India to start that journey, give us, let alone, of course, not to forget the talent pool that needs to, of course, be there to deliver those technologies and that innovation, all obviously give us fertile ground for us to make our bets, for us to find the partners, and once that is done, what we've seen, financing usually come. What I think we have to address jointly, collectively today, to deliver what we need to deliver because of the urgency, because of the speed and the scale, is to take the next step and be bolder in innovating on how we collaborate, on how we accept that we can't resolve this equation on our own, as we might have done in the past, that we have to find the ways and therefore create obviously also a fertile ground for those partnerships, for that innovation on the collaboration side.
Right. Arunabha, as we've been hearing Claudio also, industry needs clarity. They need policy clarity. They need to know which are the areas where the country and the government is betting on. And then they can open up investments. And of course, they would want their investments to bring returns in the long term. They would never want to invest in the short term. As somebody who also works very closely with the government, just as the Energy Resources Institute does, we are seeing the government pushing the National Green Hydrogen Mission. The PLI scheme gives a sense to us that when it comes to mobility, India wants to push ahead with electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So, keeping some of the recent announcements in mind, tell us how India would like to drive the energy transformation, and if the private sector, if private equity funds are looking to invest in India's ecosystem, which are the areas where India is ready or really looking to transform in the long term?
Sure. I mean, just first of all, building on what Claudio was saying and what you picked up on, you know, any investment in the energy sector requires some TLC. And that's not tender love and care. It's actually transparency, longevity, and certainty, right? So the Prime Minister's announcement gives you that long term, that longevity, that direction of travel, right? The transparency will come not just from policy announcements, but the way regulators interpret those policy announcements. The certainty will come from the legislative backing. And that's why soon after the Prime Minister made the announcement in Glasgow, I recommended that we should have not just a climate change law, but also a climate change commission with statutory basis in the Constitution, so that the center and the states are able to work together and coordinate. Right? That combination of the long-term target combined with the transparency and how regulators interpret and the certainty coming from legislative backing gives a lot of confidence to investors, whether it's a PE fund, whether it's a company's own balance sheet, or whether it is someone trying to acquire assets that are maybe 20 years old already and trying to see, can I now refinance this for another 20 years?
Right.
What can't you still control? You can't control currency fluctuation. It is not in Claudio's hand. It is not in Renew Power's hand. It is not in NTPC's hand where India's currency will go. We hope RBI will keep it stable, but there will be fluctuation. Right. We can't control sometimes for some loopy administrators cancelling contracts. And of course, we can turn to the courts, but it suddenly sends off a bad signal to the markets. Right? So, how do you control for these non-project risks? Whether it's currency hedging, whether it is policy hedging, whether it is the financial health of the off-taker, the distribution company, as Mr. Kant was saying, we need public finances to de-risk the private investment.
Yeah.
You don't need public finance to go into vanilla project investment. You need to de-risk. And that's where domestic financing, but also international financing will have to come in. Right. The climate finance that India is asking for is not to spend that $10 trillion that CW has put out today will be the cost for our net zero transition. It is to ask for the de-risking component. Right. That then gives confidence to your PE fund, to the markets to come in with big money for the long term. In the absence of that de-risking, right, you don't get the volume of capital at the speed that we need.
Great points there. we need of course policy clarity, and we need the government to go in and de-risk these projects. So, there is a certain amount of comfort to investors as well. But Dr. Dhawan, if I can get you in, from what we understand from government briefings is, yes, the Prime Minister has given these 5 major commitments at COP26, an impressive pledge, but now India in a few years will have to send them as updated NDCs as well. We will have to turn some of this into law if we really have to turn things around. What, according to you, should be the immediate priorities in terms of putting this into legislation?
Well, you are absolutely right, because we are otherwise, as long as it remains optional, many a times we do not follow. But interacting with many of the companies of their own, because before the Prime Minister made this pledge of 2070, the companies on their own, as a responsible company, they are coming forward. And really speaking, I feel that this generation is far more responsible, and they are asking questions to us. And therefore, perhaps it is good for the company itself to go green, because then the buyer, the consumer will also say, this is a green company, so I would like to go for their product. So, while it is important for legislation, but in a way you can only make it a legislation when you have sources as well. Do you have the technology? You can't make a rule and say that you can't grow unless and until you have this. So, that should come after a few years. Right now is the need that we have finances, we have the technology, and we give due respect to the companies who are intending to go green.
Right, but at the same time, if I may ask you, disclosures are very important.
That's absolutely right.
And I have been reading reports by the CDP, which is a non-profit, which basically looks at the kind of disclosures that companies are making when it comes to their own sustainable development targets, what they're doing themselves to minimize climate risks as well. What can we do in terms of law? What can the RBI do to make sure that banks provide more credit towards helping companies in their energy transition move towards more non-fossil fuels? Also, what the private sector is doing, whether the private sector is setting those targets as well. What more can be done in terms of disclosures and regulation to back that?
Well, as I said, I will still say, because we should be ready with the technologies. There are so many sectors where today we do not have the technologies. Like for example, if we even look at cement sector, it is difficult, not impossible, and of course, there are cases where they are leading the way. But you cannot, you have to compare apple with apple. So, you can't say that in this sector, this is what we are going to do, in this sector, this, or we really work on it. So, it will not be immediate, it is going to take us some time. How much green can they go?
Yeah.
So, that kind of studies are required. We need to do modeling, we need to do research, technological options that are available and so on before we really come up with legislation.
All right, Arnava wants to come.
Just a two-finger on that one. I agree that we need the technology, but I think we also need the signal to develop the technology.
Yeah.
Right? So, in 2009 when President Obama took office, they put out something called the Sunshot Initiative. Right? Rather than Kennedy's moonshot, the Obama administration's sunshot. At that time, the price of solar was more than $4 a watt. And Sunshot Initiative was bring it down to less than $1 a watt. Right? The technology didn't exist, right? But it was a signal. Now, fast forward to 2021, on Independence Day, Prime Minister puts forward a green hydrogen mission. Technology doesn't exist at scale. There's some experiments happening in Sweden, some experiments happening in Japan. But what do we say? We have a mission with a mantra 111. Right now, the cost of green hydrogen is more than $4 a kilogram. Within 1 decade, bring down the cost of 1 kilogram of green hydrogen to less than $1. Right? What this does is it then signals to industry that look, this is the direction it's going to go. And you have to ask yourself, Parikshit, you were asking earlier, you know, what are the signals India is putting out? I think it's very important that we don't just think about what the PM said at COP. let's just look at from August onwards what's happened. The Green Hydrogen Mission announced in August. In September, the United Nations held for the first time in 40 years a high-level dialogue on energy. Companies and countries had to submit energy compacts. 200 compacts were submitted across the world. 20 of them, 1/10 of the world's energy compacts came from India. That's the national government, companies like NTPC, Dalmia Cement, also cities coming forward. 20 energy compacts. That's also a signal. Then comes the hydrogen partnership under the Quad. And then comes the COP26 announcements. And we are not done with the year yet. The Electricity Act Amendment Bill is also pending in Parliament. When you start lining up all of this, it's a month after month after month signal that India wants to not just transition its energy system, but transform its economy.
Right. Yeah. No, that's an important point, and I think only one thing that I'd like to add is the fact that today close to 20 Indian states have their own electric vehicle policies, and just before these announcements on green hydrogen, India restructured its FAME scheme, which has given quite a big boost to electric vehicles. And in the pandemic period, especially in the last 6 to 7 months, we have seen quite a jump in electric vehicle penetration in India, especially in places like New Delhi. But I'm now going to speak about climate tech a little bit, and Dr. Gera, if I can get you in, how can India become an exponent of climate tech, if I may ask you?
I think these panelists would be better placed to answer, but continuing with the previous one, I would just like to add the transition to EVs. Government is really committed. In fact, our own ministry is driving this PLI scheme for advanced chemistry cells, which is a very clear signal that we want to go into EVs in a big way. We want to go into storage in a big way. So there
the messaging is clear.
Yeah, message is very clear. And why? Because once we have our own in-house production of lithium-ion cells, you will find what is right now making it non-viable cost is the cost of the battery, because we are fully dependent on the imports. Once that comes down, you will find number of vehicles on the road, particularly in the public transport system, multiplying to a large extent.
You know, I'm going to steal a line from what Rajiv Bajaj, the managing director of Bajaj Auto, had told us in an interview. We had a detailed interview with him on CNBC TV18 when they were setting up a whole new EV subsidiary, and he was quite humble about it, ladies and gentlemen. And he said that, you know, electric vehicles is a whole new ball game. This is something that will require the entire Bajaj Auto to change from the bottom to the board level, and possibly the managing director as well. This is probably the only sector that where your startups and legacy companies like Bajaj Auto are at the same starting line. Yeah, they are competing. Today the sales of the volume sales of a startup like Ather may actually be a little more than electric vehicle sales of a company like Bajaj Auto or a TVS for that matter, and these are legacy players. But yes, lot is changing right now. We are still an IC engine dominated economy, and that was the reason why I was asking you this, ma'am. When we speak about climate tech, there is so much happening in this space, and perhaps that is an opportunity for India to get ahead. It is often said that we lost out in the mobile phone revolution, but this is probably a sector, energy transformation, new technologies. This is somewhere we can take the lead.
Hydrogen economy, for example, that we talked about. Not only that, coal gasification, alternate uses of coal. Now we have large reserves of coal in our country. So like from our perspective, like we are working for conversion of coal to methanol. Yeah. Methanol can be used as a blending agent. We, as Mr. Amitabh Pant mentioned, we are dependent for these imports. So that can come down once we are able to create our own methanol from coal and do the blending, and we have very successfully implemented some pilot projects in this area also. Right. So I think there are many areas, but then again the technology, the need for technology is paramount at this point in time, whether we talk about hydrogen electrolyzer, hydrogen economy in a big way, even coal to methanol on a have some technology which goes hand in hand with our Indian conditions.
Right. Claudio, I'll get you in on this. We've been hearing Renuka, Gera, Arunabha and Dr. Dhawan as well. We need, of course, there are ideas. There are ideas which have been implemented in other parts of the world. Some countries have achieved scale, others have not. Yes, India is exploring several technologies, but from a private sector experience, from Hitachi's experience, what will work in India?
If you look at one example that I think it fits very nicely to the India case, we talked about technologies, we talked about the scalability of that technology, the speed at which that technology needs to be deployed. And there is no doubt that the digitalization of this value chain in the energy system is essential to deliver that scale, to deliver that speed. And when you look at then, if you want to become a leader in this climate energy transition and provide the technology necessary to do so, you need a lot of competence in addition to the energy side, a lot of competence on the digital side. And there is no doubt, I don't think that anyone would debate that that competence, that pool of talents, of resources, of know-how, of also supply chain in India is a great starting point to then complement those two aspects. And I think that that's something maybe that we tend to underestimate, how important digitalization is to make this energy transition reality. And then once again, if we look at Hitachi Energy, being now part of the broader Hitachi family, in India, Hitachi Energy is over 5,000 people. But in India, Hitachi as a group has about 50,000 people. And a big chunk of those are dedicated resources that deal with nothing else than digitalization of processes, of industries, of our customers, of our partners. So I think there is a great opportunity for us to take that step, but also for India to leverage that ecosystem that today is available.
Right. Just taking a cue from what Claudio was saying, Arunabha, what do you think, what are some of the steps that India needs to take towards digitization? When we have our COP26 targets, our climate mitigation targets, what is the kind of digitization push that is needed from the Indian government?
No, the basic backbone architecture is already there, which again Mr. Kant was also referring to. The only thing is what we've not done is captured the full potential of it in the energy sector, right? So one of the things in which the power sector of the future is going to look very different from the power sector of the past is the distributed production and consumption of the electricity. That does not make the grid irrelevant, but except that now the grid will have to work with not individual source big power plants, but a huge number of power plants from our roofs to this hotel, right? I mean, CW's estimate is that 2070 net zero translates to 5,600 gigawatts of solar. We're not going to be getting that from just solar parks, you know, in big parcels of land. So the digitization is absolutely central to make that happen. Now, for digitization to happen, you need to create the policy framework that allows for the cross-trading of power from the home consumer, who is also now the home producer, right? You also need that home or that hotel or that hospital to now talk to a electric vehicle charging infrastructure. You need that electric vehicle charging infrastructure to talk to a distributed green hydrogen production outfit, right? All of this is going to be controlled by, you know, by not just the electrons, but the bytes that drive the electrons, right? And that's where again, you know, companies like Hitachi Energy will be central because they understand both You know, they are understanding the digital part and they are understanding the electrons part, right? But I am not here to plug for Hitachi Energy. I am just saying we need to create the policy framework for many such companies to either find those resources within their conglomerates or to, I mean, Claudio has mentioned collaboration at least 3 times, I think, in his initial remarks, right? We need to then, the energy company has to talk to a digital company and a digital company needs to talk to energy companies. And you will then see a whole new brand of companies emerging, right? What is an electric vehicle today? It's an iPad on wheels, right? So that's why Tesla is the world's most valued company right now.
Right. Just talking about collaborations once again, Ms. Gera, you said that we need technologies.
Yes.
If, for example, a PSU like BHEL doesn't have a technology right now, is there often thought of probably collaborating with companies like Hitachi, with the private sector?
We have been collaborating with them for more than 3 decades now on various fronts, as ABB also. For all the major HVDC job projects which have been done in the country, we have done along with them. So I think we are, and right now also we are talking to Hitachi for collaboration in the field of transportation as well.
Okay.
So that's something common. For Industry 4 also we are looking for partners, the digitalization as he mentioned.
But what are the kind of collaborations that we will need? What are the areas that we would need collaboration for the future?
Mainly in the field of Industry 4, as I would say, another term for digitalization, and then carbon capture technologies. That is very important that we get into it right now as we are in the process of transition of this energy mix. And also as some of the new businesses as they come, similarly some processes will start fading out also. So we should be prepared for training, retraining and reskilling our manpower, which is very important, the workforce.
Absolutely. Right.
So that process also must start in parallel now.
Right, because reskilling the workforce is very important, but also investments to come in, because every company will think that if you're going to invest in a technology, invest in a company, how long will it take to skill the workforce or reskill the workforce as well? Dr. Dhawan, coal was a very controversial issue at COP26. I was told that at least 3 times India was sent to draft and asked to agree to a text on phasing out of coal and fossil fuel subsidies. And every time they had strongly objected to that, and in the end we of course saw a change in the COP26 text. But has the Energy Resources Institute made a roadmap for the government or for the private sector as to how India can go about reducing its coal usage?
Yeah, definitely. It was quite a controversial issue, and I should say we were criticized also to some extent. But look, coal is a very sensitive issue. If you look at country like ours, and as rightly mentioned, that developed world has made use of fossil fuels in the past. They have created this CO2 chamber, but now it is that you don't use, and for us it is not just coal, it is also that there are so many communities associated with it. So we need to develop a roadmap, but really speaking, TERI and I should say ETC along with ETC Commission, we are also working on the phasing out plan. It has to be phased down, there is no second opinion about it. But it is only when you have other sources of energy available and integrated, because development has to take place. That message is very clear. So there are so many external factors which will decide how soon it can be phased out. And I'll also like to just mention, because the discussion which was going on, and that was basically climate tech, India can definitely become a hub. Because really speaking, as Claudio mentioned, that it's a fertile ground. What is it that we lack? Nothing. We have manpower available. First of all, as a country, we know that the impact of climate change is going to be so severe, we can't do without it. So like we say, necessity is the mother of invention. So we all have realized that there is necessity. We have trained manpower, also young manpower who can be trained. In terms of, I should say, finances which are required to develop a technology, they are comparatively lower in our country compared to many other countries. What is needed, as very rightly pointed out in this panel, is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. We need to collaborate, we do not have to reinvent, but we also have to invent along with leaders. We also need to fine tune the technologies for our needs, and really speaking, once we succeed, I'll say the entire developing world will follow us. So therefore, India is a very important country to show the way to the world.
All right, and I'd just like to sum up what all our panelists said. Collaboration is the key. We need policy clarity. We need the right technologies, as Dr. Gera pointed out. And at the same time, we need the government to de-risk the industry as well if we want to provide them the right ecosystem, the right comfort to function in India and invest in India. A lot of opportunities for the private sector, a lot of opportunities for the government there. Thank you so much for joining us, and please give a big round of applause to our panel here. Excellent views, and frankly all our guests here closely involved with the government's transformation exercise and also their plans to reach the 2070 goals as well. Claudio, Arunabha Ghosh, Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Dr. Renuka Gera, thank you very much for joining us here at this panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.